For coming out for this training for community groups with Brad House. My name is Nick. I'm the pastor here at Cross of Christ. I want to welcome you guys. If there's anything you guys need, please ask me or our team. The restrooms are right here behind you to your left. There's refreshments straight back. If you haven't grabbed a book yet, please feel free to grab one of the books from the table. We'd love to bless you with that. Our church this past 2 weeks have done a survey of our community groups. We sent out a series of 40 questions to kind of gauge the health of how we're doing. And I got to tell you, that is a sobering, helpful set of responses that we got. And we did it intentionally to have it before Brad got out here. And I'm guessing some of you guys are like us. You have community groups going. There are a lot of pain points, and you're just trying to figure out how can we get these things healthy. And maybe some of you are haven't started community groups, but you know our church needs them. We want to do them. And you're trying to just get maybe a paradigm for how to do that well. Whatever it is, we want to welcome you here. And our hope is that this would be a blessing for you because we believe that we are made for relationship. We believe that God does his best work of transformation in community. And so all of us here, our hope is for you to take what you learn here back to your churches, that we would see more people come to meet Jesus, to see the gospel go more deeply into people's lives. If you guys would, please pray with me. Lord, we thank you that you rescue sinners, and we thank you that you rescue sinners into community. God, we long to see you, by the power of your Spirit, do incredible work in our own lives and in the lives of those around us, that we would come to see you more clearly, that we would let go of the things that keep us from you. God, would you help us as church leaders, as community group participants, to learn today, and all that we get here? Would you help us to take something away that we might make our groups healthier, deeper, more vulnerable, more life-giving, and God, more missional? That we would see more people come to know you. It's in your great name, Jesus, that we pray. Amen. All right, if you guys would please welcome up Brad House.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Nick, for having me out again. When Nick originally asked me to come out and talk today, I was a little nervous because there's a little basketball tournament going on around the country. But by God's grace, if anybody got a bracket out there? Anybody? We watched basketball last night, and we realized, hey, if you were trying to win a bracket, there's no chance. Everybody's out. If you want to just, one of the things I try to do as I'm speaking is try to get people to feel for me and feel kind of what it's like. I grew up just north of East Lansing, so I'm a Michigan State fan. And for all the people that don't care anything about basketball, there was a tragic occurrence last night where Michigan State lost to a 15 seed. And that doesn't happen very often. So there's that. So I've got nothing to watch today. Hopefully you've got nothing you want to watch today. We're going to be talking about community. We're going to be, my intent for this, obviously, as a guy who loves community, is to have interaction. So today we're going to be talking a lot. And so how many of you lead community groups? You're leading one right now, right? How many of you have experienced that moment when you've asked a question and you look out around your circle and everyone stares at you awkwardly and tries not to make eye contact? Have you experienced that? Anybody experienced that last night? All right. So my prayer for us this morning is that I would not experience that, okay? So if you have questions, feel free. It doesn't blow me up. If you've got something like, hey, before you go on, can you talk about this? If I ask a question, this is a place to dialogue and to understand some of these concepts around community. So the more that we can talk, the more everybody's going to benefit. So please participate in the discussion. I know some of you I've known for a couple of years. You've heard me talk before, and I'll just apologize right now. My jokes are the same. And a lot of what we're going to talk about is going to be stuff that we've done similarly. I think a year or so ago, we came and we talked through this, but talking with Nick, we really wanted to go back through, especially with the feedback that we got, at least from Cross of Christ, some of the areas that they're looking to continue to focus on our areas that we've talked about before, but it's always good to kind of go back through and say, okay, do we really understand these concepts and put them into practice? So there's going to be some review for some of you. Some of you have heard it maybe 6 or 7 times. It's still coming back, right there. Still coming. Either I'm not very good at communicating this, or it's really compelling. The other thing I want to say as we get started is that I believe all of you, or most of you, rose your hand that you are community group leaders. And so when you're listening today and you're taking notes, I want you to take notes and listen like a community group leader. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that a lot of times we'll come to a conference or we'll come to a training and we listen like participants. What do I need to hear? What do I personally need to hear to be able to do whatever I'm trying to do better? What I want you to do is realize that what you're going to be hearing today is something that you need to transfer to someone else. So you should be thinking like a teacher. I've got a group of people that I'm leading, and I want to be able to help them understand why I might be doing something different in my community group. And if what often happens is that, and I talk with people in my own church and other churches all the time, is that they'll be really excited about something that we're talking about. That might be going deeper with soulful communion in their group, or we'll be talking about engaging missionally with their neighbors, and they'll be really excited, and they'll go, okay, I'm going to do this, A, B, and C. I'm going to do that within my community group. And then they go to their group and they tell their people what they're going to do. This is how we're doing things differently. Can you imagine what might be wrong with that, or what they might miss? Is that participation thing we're talking about, right? What might happen if you do that? Yeah, people might not understand why we're doing this differently. And in most cases, they won't. I can almost guarantee they won't know why you've maybe changed up the way, the time you meet, or some of the events that you're trying to pull off. And if they don't understand why, then we're going to talk about this later. They're not going to have that ownership within the group itself. So my encouragement is, as you listen to the discussion, as you're talking and you're thinking, think about how would I take what I'm learning and actually bring this into my particular community, or if you're a pastor and you're overseeing groups, like how am I going to transfer this information and help the people that I'm responsible for? Does that make sense? So just trying to say that up front, because if I tell you at the end, then you'd be like, oh, why don't you tell me that? And so want to get that out of the way. What I want to do right before we get started, and this is just, we've got a long day, and I was thinking about as I was coming here this weekend, and I was just reflecting on why this is so important for the church in general, why community is so important to the church in general, and I don't know if Nick actually told you what I do now. But I work at Sojourn Community Church in Louisville, Kentucky, and I'm the executive pastor of ministry there. And so we're a multi-site church. We have 4 campuses, and I oversee those 4 campuses, and I oversee multiple ministries that we want to see grow within our church. And so because of that, personally, I have a gentleman at our church who now runs community groups for Sojourn, and I don't do that personally anymore. But I do stay very connected to that, and I still teach and work with churches, not because it's my job, but because I believe so strongly in the effect that it has on the church, and not only the effect that it has on the church, but the potential effect it has for our cities and our towns and our neighbors. And so that passion, one of those places that reminds me of why it's so important for us to continue to strive for deeper community, comes out of Ephesians 4. So if you've got a Bible, you just roll there. We're going to do a little bit of devotion this morning. Is that cool? Everybody down with that? So Ephesians 4, verse 1, and I don't want anybody to get mad at me. I grabbed an NLT this morning. But it's a devotional time, so it'll work out great for us. So, actually, you know what I'll do? I actually like the wording in the ESV, so I'm going to go there. So Ephesians 4:1 says, I, therefore, a prisoner for the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Now, sometimes we read this and our mind goes to this, walk in a manner worthy of your calling, and it feels like, okay, this is God putting his foot down, saying, okay, like you've got something to live up to, go live up to it. But the feel of this verse, this urging us to walk in that manner, is that of a loving father, a father coming and saying, I have something beautiful and amazing for you, and I want you to experience it. And so I'm urging you to strive for this unity, to be eager to maintain unity through humbleness, gentleness, and patience. And so if you're reading Ephesians 4, there's a lot of amazing theology that Paul puts in here for us to understand this unity that comes from our Trinitarian God. But if you drive all the way down to kind of his goal and his hope, and we can see that in verse 12, as he talks about all the pastors and the apostles and the prophets and the evangelists, shepherds and teachers. What are they here for? For building up the body of Christ. In verse 13, until we attain the unity of faith and the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. Let's just read that again. Just kind of doing devotional here. Let's just think about this vision that he has for you and for the people in your community group and for your church, that we would attain the unity of faith, knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. Now, I'm not going to pretend in this short amount of time to be able to explain what is he talking about when he talks about the fullness, the stature of the fullness of Christ. But there's this picture that Jesus, as a fully mature man, human being, this picture, this metaphor of the church becoming like a mature, fully mature man, that is this goal that Paul has here for the Ephesians, that God has for us as the church, that we would grow in our understanding, our knowledge of Jesus, our maturity and our unity, that as we come together in community, that's the picture that he has for us. And so when we're talking about when we're going to be talking about today about community, why we do community, when we're going to get into the nuts and bolts, how we do community, or how we can do community, I want you to have that picture of what God wants for us, is he wants us to experience this unity that he experiences within the Godhead, because he loves us. Not because there's something that we have to attain or accomplish, but because this is an experience that he hands to his church, his adopted sons and daughters. He says, I want you to experience this type of love and unity. And so community is not this, hey, it's a way to keep people organized within a church, or it's a way to close the back door of the church. That's not why we exist. That's not why community is so important. It's because God has this beautiful experience of unity with him and his Son that he wants us to experience, and this is the way that we see that happen. Does that make sense? So I want keep that in the back of our mind as we roll in today and talk through some of this stuff. That question of why, and for me, this picture is one of the pictures that keeps me pushing at our church in Louisville and within our network and with the churches around the country, pushing for this vision of community that goes beyond just maintaining, a back door of the church, or goes beyond just Bible study and learning about the Bible, but really is a comprehensive, holistic view of community, is because I believe in this picture. And so that's what we're going to try to get at today is, okay, how do we kind of develop that conviction, and then how do we live that out? And so one of the first questions that I want to start with is the question of why we do community. Now, that may seem like, well, didn't you just tell us that? But I'm into honest conversation. And so what I want to do as we get started is I want us all to really wrestle. So I gave you a little bit of my why I do this. And what I want to do is have all of us wrestle with the question of why. Because if we don't understand why we're doing it, then our motivation will eventually wane. And so what I want us to start this morning is a pretty simple question. Part of this is to get us talking with one another, but the other is really to kind of set up for us a foundation and a conviction that will allow us to develop life-giving community. And so I want you to think about this question. If I were to roll into your church and I was asking questions about the church, and maybe it was one of your pastors or it was someone in the church said, hey, you should talk to so-and-so, and they're pointing at you about getting into one of our community groups, small groups, life groups. What do we call them? Anybody else got another name? Missional community? Any other names? No names? Life group, right? So they said, you should get into one of our groups, and they pointed to you. And I want you to think, if you had never heard me talk about Ephesians 4 this morning, how do you answer that question? So the question is, someone comes to you and say, why should I get involved in your community group? New to the church, maybe not even a believer. How do you answer that question?
We learn best how to live out our faith in community.
Okay, so I got a small board here, but we're going to work out. So I need to write small. So I'm going to say, learn to live out our faith. Yeah. We build relationships. My children can't read my handwriting, so I'm assuming you probably can't either, but hopefully you hear what people say when they holler them out. You can rattle them faster if you want. Okay, so she said to intimately understand God's grace, but I'm just going to say understand God's grace because I'm terrible at spelling and I don't have much room. Accountability. So someone comes up to you and they say, hey, someone said I should get into your community group, and I'm asking you, hey, why should I do that? So right now we're answering so you can be accountable. Is that that's a good answer. I'm not making fun of that. I'm just saying, but is that what you say? What do you say? So I'm just coming up. Why should I get in your group? Fun. Now we're being honest. Awesome. We've broken in. Yeah, we usually don't lead with some of that kind of right? But fun, we lead with fun. What else do we lead with? Free food. Now see? I ain't calling anybody else liars. I'm just saying now we're getting into real answers, right? Meet people, right? Meet people. So this is the relationships, right? You can meet people. Study. So mission. We do mission. It's like family. We'll still put here. Any other answers? Ways that you would talk to someone about it? Way in the back. Okay, so application is kind of learn to live application. Awesome. Dave Kraft. What's that?
So Ephesians 4, I would say to be equipped.
Yeah, to be equipped. I'm going to give that one column 2. There's actually 3 columns. Now you're all nervous about your answers, right? Why is no one in the other column? That's right. Any other answers?
Support and encourage one another.
Okay, support. Let's cover. I'm going to give you third column here. Yeah.
Historically, the church has always gathered in larger settings for worship and kind of broken off into smaller communities to live it out.
Yeah. So this is live life. Guess we kind of got live life together. What's that? Unity. That might be here. Awesome. Okay. I've got, can't tell, but I've got 3 columns here in answers. And the reason I have 3 columns here is that I've done this a lot. I've asked this question a lot. And generally, what the answers that I get, it's a why question, right? Why questions are motivation. What motivates me to, in this case, lead a community group, open my home, have people in, sacrifice for people? What motivates me to do that? And when someone's coming to me and saying, why should I get in a community group? They're asking that question, why? Why should I commit to you and your group and give up my time to be a part of this community? But the reason I started doing this with groups is because when I would ask individuals, I'd always get into this same conversation that the answers that they would give back were often in these same categories. And the categories are, now you're all going to feel sad, but there are why answers to a why question. There are these questions, why is what motivates me to do this? This is the undergirding, what motivates my actions and why I'm doing it. Then there are what answers. What answers are, this is what we actually do. So when someone says, why should I come into your group? And I'm in that same boat. Often my reaction is, well, hey, we get together, we have dinner, we enjoy one another, we have some discussion, we hang out, we get into the what. And then this last category is the for category. For category is the result. And we say, well, this is what we're trying to accomplish. So we're trying to understand God's grace. The goal is to be equipped. The goal is to be supported. The goal is to find unity. These are 4 answers. An answer that's directed around, this is ultimately what we're trying to accomplish in community. Do you guys understand those 3 categories? So one of the questions, and this is very typical when I ask this question, and what's typical is that we generally fill up the what column. We have the most responses in the what column. Now, one of the reasons for that is that I control the pen. And so I can put your answers into any column that makes sense and is easier for me to teach this lesson. But if you actually were listening, these were the actual, like when we're thinking off the top of our head, what would I really say to somebody? What do I say to somebody? These are typically the answers we give. So let's first ask the question, why? Why do we give those answers? Why do you think we respond with a what answer to a why question? In the back? It's hard to be alone. So when someone's coming and saying, I'm interested in community, what you're perceiving is it's difficult for them to be alone, and so we're trying to bring to them some answers that will answer that, right? Yeah.
Well, I think that we're just trained to always ask the question for what do I get out of it? The what question. Giving the what answer. Usually what draws people in, what are they going to get out of it?
That's a very good observation. What he said is that we're trained to ask the question, what do I get out of it? And we're also trained to answer to that same question, what will you get out of it? Any salesmen in the room? Anybody do sales? All right, we're in Orange County. We sell things in Orange County, right? So what is the job of a salesman or a saleswoman? What's your job? To sell things. But how do you do that? You find out what they need. What do you need? And then you give them what they need. What happens if they don't have a need? You invent a need, right? You convince them that they have a need. The best company at doing this right now in the country is Apple, right? I mean, do you really need an iPhone, an iPad, Apple Watch, and a MacBook? Do you need, you see? That's why they're the best. Even when we point out the obvious, it's still like, no, yeah, I really do. I can see where this little mini computer helps this little mini computer that helps this slightly bigger computer helps that. I can see, I mean, because what do you do when you're on a small plane versus when you're riding the bus? Yeah, whatever. So that's what Apple does, right? Apple's amazing at doing that, which is to say, let's just create the need. We'll just tell them what they want, right? And they're very good at it. Yeah.
I probably didn't say it correctly, but I was aiming more at a why.
Sure.
Focused on kind of the history of the church, that there must be a why based in the entire identity of the church has always had a larger gathering and a smaller gathering.
Yeah, so I could say historically, I think historically could be a very good. I mean, that's a good why. Like that's a why answer. I'm doing this because this is the tradition of the church. So that's definitely a why answer. Yeah. Yeah, definitely can. If our answer sheet, what she said is like if you say it's absolutely necessary. So if we go to have to, right? So you got to do it. Like this is the rule to be a Christian or to be a part of this church. Then that is law or grace, right? That's law, very clearly. Yeah.
The reason that we don't answer why questions is because community means vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
People don't like to be weak or expose their shame. So really be known.
Yeah, without a doubt. And so what if you didn't hear what he's saying that community is about vulnerability and being known, and people are afraid to be known. And so what that means is that as you're answering that question, you're anticipating their fear of being known, and you're tapping into your own fear of being known. And so what we do is we fall back to what the gentleman said over here, which is the way we've been trained to address people is like, let's not go into this dynamic of vulnerability. Let's just go what we know will work. What we've been taught as salespeople, and whether you're a salesperson or not, you've been bombarded by sales pitches every moment of your waking life now because of all of those Apple products, right? So you get the what's your need? How do we meet the need? And that's a lot easier answer. It's a lot easier to go down this road because we don't have to get into that vulnerable piece, right? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we live in a world that defines you by what you do. And that is true for the church, and it's true for outside the church. So it's like, what do you do? What do you do? What do you do? So when we get into answering questions about community, people want to know, okay, what is it? What do I do to be a part of this church? And is community one of those things? Okay, what do we do when we go to community? Do we eat? What do we do? We want to answer that question because it gives us, at least in our culture, that's where we find our identity and value and worth, right? By what I do. So whether we're conscious of this idea or not, we're generally asking this kind of, we're more like asking what questions a lot of times. And so we're almost naturally answering with what answers, even if someone asks a what question. Yeah. Did you guys hear that? And so this is the point of this exercise, and we're already hitting it here, is that what he said was that is that this idea that we are dependent upon community for our existence, not that we would cease to exist, but for our growth and for our maturation as brothers and sisters in Christ, that we are created and built for community. We know that's true because we've been taught that, and we may have even taught it ourselves, but we may not totally believe it. That we could actually flourish. I would probably use more of that. The idea of you can argue someone can go live in a cave somewhere and they could technically live, but they're not going to flourish outside of community. But do we actually believe it? We live in a culture where most of us live isolated lives. And so giving an answer around that direction almost feels hypocritical for us. So why don't we answer these questions? So what I want to get from this idea of the what is that two things. One is that we have a tendency to answer this question because we believe that that's what people want to know. We know that they come from a culture that says, what do you do, what do you do, what do you do? We know that they have a need that they're trying to meet, and we try to meet that culture. But what does that create? If this is someone new to the church, this is a new believer, what does that create within our church? Yeah, it creates this what has been for, I don't know, maybe decades, maybe generations, this dirty word within the church, which is consumerism. If you've ever, for those that are pastors in the room, maybe if you've been in leadership of your church, you've talked about this, like, what do we do about consumerism? People just come and want to take, but they don't want to participate and give of themselves within the church. Has anybody had that conversation or read something on that or been a part of that conversation, right? And like I've sat with pastors and said, this is ridiculous. What do we do? How do we move people away from consumerism? And then what we do is we get up every Sunday and we say, you should get in a community group because that's the place where we have relationships. You want relationships, don't you? We have fun and we eat meals. You want meals and have fun, don't you? Well, then get in one of our community groups. And when you do that year after year, maybe decade after decade, and then you come back and you complain that your people are consumeristic, who's to blame? We've taken what the world uses to sell people things, and we brought that into the church, and we've said, this is why you should participate in community, this essential aspect of our human existence, and we've turned it into a commodity to sell to people. And then we complain that they act like consumers. And so what I want us to do is I want us to at least acknowledge that hey, we don't want to perpetuate that within our churches. And I'm not saying that you can't answer this question, or you can't tell people what you do in your community group. What I'm suggesting is that we actually should, at least as leaders, start talking about this why, understand what is our deepest motivation for why we do community. One, so that we can solidify it in our own hearts. As the gentleman said over here, maybe it's because we don't believe this, right? So what is this? What is this why? Historically, lost our gentleman's over here. Historically, yes, the church is gathered in these smaller groups, and community is a place where we apply and live out our lives. And there is this concept that community is essential, but we also know that, man, that's not a very compelling motivation, the have to, right? Like when you tell people you have to do it, well, why? Well, because Pastor Nick said we had to. How long is that motivation sustainable? That I'm doing it because I'm told I'm... Hi, anybody have teenagers? Does that motivation work? Yeah, that motivation does. It works once, maybe. Well, if you're lucky. If you got a firstborn child, it might work twice. Thirdborn child, it never works, right? So this have to isn't necessarily our primary motivation, but here's the interesting thing. We talked about it. There is this reality that we were created for community. And so when we talk about community and we try to understand, and you've probably heard that, you might have heard me talk about this before, you've heard other people talk about this before, is that our motivation from community goes all the way back to the garden. You've heard this talk at some point before, this idea that we're created in the image of a Trinitarian God who exists for all eternity past and will exist for all eternity in community. He exists in community, and he creates us, and he says, let us, plural, create man in our image, right? So there's this concept that when we're created, that God has been then speaking everything into creation. When he gets to us, when he gets to humankind, he's doing something very special. What he's doing is he's saying, I want mankind to what? To bear my image. And what do we mean by being an image bearer? We hear that language a lot. It's very, very cool language at least in the Reformed world these days. What does it mean to bear an image? What's that? To look like something, right? This is Orange County's a little bit. Are there any statues in this town? Do we have no statues? It makes it really hard to make this illustration, but you've seen statues, right? So Philadelphia, right? We got Rocky. What's the intent of a statue? Peyton Manning is getting his statue built outside of Indianapolis, the stadium in Indianapolis, right? We all heard that, football fans? I got to use something other than sports analogies, I guess, with this crowd. I'm going to have to work on that. But so they're going to build you got Rocky Balboa, who's not a real person, so that might be harder, but let's take Peyton Manning. They're going to make a statue of Peyton Manning. What is their intent? The intent is to honor him, right? So they're going to take probably copper, and they're going to take this material, and they're going to form it into the image of Peyton Manning, right? And the intent is to take that material and within the limitations of the material itself, to have it reflect as much truth about Peyton Manning as it can. Does that make sense? So it's going to reflect as much truth about Peyton Manning within the limitations of the material. So if they're making it out of copper, it's going to have some limitations, right? But the intent is to say, I want to speak as much truth. So what do I mean by that? Meaning that it's going to look like him. It's, like the proportions are going to be right. So when someone looks at the statue, they're saying, that is Peyton Manning. That's what Peyton Manning is like. And so when God does that with us, when he creates mankind, he says, within the limitations of a created being, meaning, so there are things that we can't as created beings do to reflect the true nature of God. We're not omniscient. We're not omnipresent. We can't be everywhere. We can't know everything. We don't have the strength of God, but there are ways in which we reflect the nature of God. The fact that we have an intellect, the fact that we can be creative and create, the fact that we are relational are all ways that we image, or that we bear the image of God. So within the limitations of being a created being, and the intent was to let all of creation look upon mankind and say, God is like that. Not that that's all he is, but that we bear some of that image, right? So as an individual human being, you, sitting in your chair, some of those attributes of God you can bear on your own. So the idea that you can think, the idea that you have emotion, the fact that you can create, all of those things as an individual human, you reflect the nature of God. But what you can't reflect on your own, and we see that in Genesis 2, is that you cannot reflect the nature of God as an isolated human being. And so when we look at, you've all heard the verse, anyone been to a Christian wedding recently? Right? And they, talk about it, right? It's not good for man to be alone. And we think, as pastors, we're like, thank you, God, for putting this verse in here so I can make a joke about not putting the toilet seat down and leaving the cap off the toothpaste and showing how men are ridiculous without wives, right? Like, that's not the purpose of that verse. God didn't put that verse in there so we could make jokes at weddings. I mean, it's useful and it's helpful, but the reason that verse is in there is for us to understand the significance of relationship for us as image bearers of God. That our why that this, we keep pointing to this have to, but that there is, for us to grow and flourish as human beings, all human beings, not just us in the church, but all human beings, that relationship, community is necessary. Okay? The problem is that oftentimes when we talk about this within a church setting, we're trying to motivate one another to reinvest in community, is that we stop right here. And then we end up with that teenage problem. That have to, just because we were created to be in community doesn't mean that that's a long-lasting motivation for us. Because it ends up being a law that we're trying to fulfill, that we're doing it because we think we have to. And so this is why when we talk about this, the gospel is so important for us to understand and how it works together with this idea that we were created in the image of God. And that's because creation didn't end in chapter 2, right? Or Genesis doesn't end in chapter 2. And so what happens is, as we all know, we know this story. Why are we rehearsing it here? We rehearse it here because it has everything to do with why we do community. If we're not motivated by the gospel itself, we're not motivated by the person and the work of Jesus, then there's no reason for us to put so much energy and so much effort into these community groups within our churches. And so when we look at what happens in Genesis 3, we see sin enter the world. What happens when sin enters the world? And think about this in terms of what you're doing and leading your community. What happens? Separation, first, from God, right? Soon as their eyes are opened, they hide. They run and they hide from God. God comes looking for them. What happens when he comes looking for them? You guys know the story? Right? Well, blame each other, but who really does the blaming? Like Adam does the blaming, right? Adam, where are you? I hid because I was naked. Well, who told you you were naked? You know? I ate the woman you gave me, Lord. Right? So who does he blame in that one sentence? It was the woman you gave me. He blames her and he blames him, God. So what Adam does is when he gets confronted, he chucks his wife under the bus. Tire track still on her. And he's like, but I mean, you gave her to me. So like really, there's only one innocent party here. I was just strolling through the forest. Somehow this fruit ended up in my mouth, right? So what does that show us? That shows us that what sin does and what the enemy does is he tries to tear apart what God has brought together. So this idea that we were created in the image of God to reflect the true nature of God, what the enemy wants to do is he wants to mar and hide the truth about who God is. And so he wants to destroy relationship within this world and within our church. Because if he can mar that image, then it's hard for people to see, well, what is the true nature of God? And so when we run into this, we started creating the image of God, then sin comes in, and it brings broken relationship between man and God, and man and one another, right? And so what Jesus does, when Jesus fulfills the law, when Jesus through his life, death, and resurrection, when he dies the death we should have died, what he does is he brings reconciliation with God, and he brings reconciliation with one another. He gives us the ministry of reconciliation. And what's going on there is that through Jesus and the good news, right, the gospel, what he's saying is that what Jesus does is he makes this community that we're trying to develop and create and really, like, if you think about it like a garden, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to nourish this idea of community. We're trying to see it grow. We're trying to see it blossom. And the only reason that we can do that is because of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Is that he makes community possible. If that didn't happen, there's still a wall of hostility, right? Between all of us. Not just between Jew and Greek, but between all of us. And so he makes it happen. And so when we talk about why would we do community groups, it's not just because we're created in community, or created for community. And though it's true that this is the history of the church, that's not why we do it. We do it because every time we gather in community, we are proclaiming the goodness of God. Right? We're proclaiming the truth about who God is. that He's a relational, loving, triune God, and we're proclaiming the truth about what He did through Christ, that He made it possible for us to be reconciled to one another, to love one another, to live in this type of community. Do you see that? I mean, there's a lot of things we're going to talk about today, but if this truth doesn't sink into us, then the rest of what I'm going to talk about is just tricks. And it will work for a short amount of time, and eventually it will fade. If our imaginations and our hearts are not captured by the beauty of God and the grace and love of Christ to accomplish this work, then there's nothing that's going to motivate us to be able to sustain community when things get difficult and tough, when you have to go make hospital visits, when you're dealing with people who are unrepentant through habitual sin, when someone loses a child or a spouse. Those things, like this is not motivating when those things come up. Am I right? I mean, is that fun? Like, those things aren't fun. And I believe that community should be fun and joyful and life-giving, but I think it should be life-giving in those moments when everything's great, and I think it should be life-giving in those moments when everything hits the fan because we're motivated by what Christ did. Amen? Yeah.
Sure. So I understand that we end up with consumerism with the what? How about the four column? Go to the same place? Or?
Well, that's a good question. So the question is, well, what happens if we start in the 4 column? So if we look at, and let's step to there. When we look at what is saying, essentially it's asking the question of what do we do, right? What kind of organizations are you involved in that do what do you do? Can you think of any groups that are kind of needs based? It's an activity. That's why we organize for the activity. Almost all of them, like what? Like your gym, club, surfing club. Is that stereotypical? I shouldn't do that. I'm going to talk later how you shouldn't generalize about people because it's unloving. So I'm going to generalize like rodeo club. You guys got that here? Right? Like clubs. Like those are the kind of groups that you organize around what you do. You find an affinity. We do this for a particular we all like rodeo, and so we joined a club. And as long as we do that, we're cool with it. And as soon as it becomes like it's not scratching the itch, then we'll drop out of the club. How many people are like, this is about the time, right, that you're dropping your gym membership? Everybody? Now you're wondering, should I really be paying $25 a month for something I never use? You're all asking that question? Well, that might be just me. When we get to the 4, there's things that we want to understand in here in the 4, right? Like these are good. All of these are good things. I mean, everything on here are good things if they're understood in their right place, right? So understanding God's grace, to be equipped, to have support for unity. These are all results, right? And we want to make sure we understand what is the result that we're actually going after in community, and these are good results. I think that I think there's a primary result that we're looking for, and I think it's can be summarized in the Great Commission, right? That I think that what we're trying to accomplish within community, the ultimate result of all of this, is that we would create disciples, that we would grow as disciples, and that we would actually see more disciples come to know Jesus, right? So for those that are already in the family, that they're growing, and for those that have yet to come into the family and be adopted into Christ, that they would come. So the Great Commission, I think, is the ultimate result. But what is the challenge if this is our answer to the why, if we think this is our motivation? Yeah. Yeah, we don't have. If we start here, we can create. Like, if you just say we're creating disciples, well, like any CrossFitters out here? Got CrossFitters? It's okay. Nobody in CrossFit in this whole church? Too expensive. Wow. Okay, well, everything's expensive, and so that one probably gets out. But like, one of the best disciple-making organizations out there right now. I mean, they are. Like, they have figured it out. You know what they use? Community. They use all the concepts of community to galvanize people's desire to work out and be a part of this organization, right? But what they've done is they've said discipleship is their goal, but they haven't set the foundation. It's a great organization. They're amazing. They do amazing stuff. But for us, we don't want to get caught in that same loop, to forget why are we doing it. What are the organizations that you are part of? So this is results, right? So 4 is what do you want? That's our target, that's our goal, that's our outcome, that's our results. What kind of organizations are you part of that you are part of that organization and you're organized around this? You're motivated by this. Most of you are a part of one of these organizations. Your job, right? Your job is a results-oriented organization. There is a result that you are all trying to accomplish. And as long as the goal that you have to get paid and put food on your table and the widgets that you're making or the whatever you're doing are getting built, that's why we're organized. That's a job, right? Was there actual widget makers out there? I don't want to offend somebody. So when I look at this and I say, okay, if we get motivated by this, if this is our motivation, the reason that it's dangerous for me is that I can be completely faithful to what God has called me to, and accomplishing this can still take a long time. Now, for some of you, you're going to see people coming to Christ, and you're going to see maturation, and you're going to be like, yes, this is what I want to do. This is motivating. This keeps me going. But there's always times when we hit a spell where we're not seeing that fruit, where we're investing in, but we're not seeing the result. And the question is, well, are you being unfaithful? Well, we have whole prophets in the gospel that were told that they were going to proclaim the truth, they were going to be faithful, and they would never hear, right? And so it's possible that we could do everything right, but we may not see the results that we want. We may not see unity. We may not feel supported. We may not get equipped. And so for me, if my motivation is in the gospel, I understand why I'm doing this, that every time we gather, we're proclaiming the truth of who God is and what Christ has done. Then when I hit dry spells and the results that we're hoping for, we're not seeing, which, let's be honest, happens a lot in our community groups, right? Like, as a leader, we're often not satisfied with the result. So if this is what motivates me as a leader, what's going to happen? You're going to try harder, you're going to try harder, you're going to try harder, and then you're going to tap out. And some of you will only try harder once before you tap out, right? Because it can feel hopeless. Does this ever feel hopeless when we rightly understand it? Never. If we're feeling hopeless, we're missing it, right? This can lead to that. And obviously with the what, in the same way, like what happens here is if you actually motivate people and you actually get them in groups, and then what happens when you don't deliver? You know, that whole issue, why is consumerism bad? Well, because we're very bad at delivering on those promises, aren't we? So if I say everything you want in community, anything you want relationships, you want to feel connected, it's going to happen in community, and I sell that to you, and then you come and you don't get it, then you're out of here, right? Like, why would I do that? You know, I was working with, I'm always nervous when these things are recorded, but I was working with a group of churches, some pastors from different large churches, and we were talking about the same issue, and I was, as I often am, I was emphatic about this point. Like, we need to understand this why, otherwise what we're building is going to burn away. And I was, apparently, I was frustrating one of the pastors there, and he said, look, Brad, I know what you're saying, but what I just tell people is that our groups are fun. Because that's what they want. They want fun. So I get up there, and when they ask me why to get in community groups, I tell them that they're fun. And I was like, okay, I get that. That's what people are looking for. Maybe I'm pushing this too hard. Can I just ask you one question? And he says, yeah. And I said, are your groups fun? And he took a minute, and he goes, oh, no, not at all. Like maybe one or two. And I'm just like, that doesn't bother you? And that's what our people, I think a lot of times people that come into the church is they hear this story about this transformation that's going to occur here, which I believe it can and will and does. But we sell them on this, like this is gonna scratch that itch that you've been looking for. And then when it doesn't happen, they're discouraged and they feel like we sold them a bill of goods, which we may have. But if we could get to the place where we were actually comfortable with this answer. Do you have one?
Should be where they learn what community and what worship is.
So the question was how does this work in conjunction with what's happening in the worship service and growing as worshipers of Christ? I think that is a four. That's okay. How does this, if that's a result that we want to see, how do those two work together? Then I think that's one of those things we're trying to figure out with kind of our target. But our why, I think, has to stay in this idea of proclaiming who God is and what Christ has done. And so the question is, why don't we do that? And we hit on it a little bit earlier. And the reason that we do this is that I think the reason that this is so long, one of the reasons this is so long, is that for us as leaders, our motivations are somewhere in here. And it may not be specifically these, but it's a thing where we have a need we're trying to meet. And we're meeting a need through community. And when someone comes to us and asks the question, why should I join your community group? It's the same question of like, why should I eat the donut you made? Or why should I drive the car you like? We go with what motivates us, right? What motivates us is what we think is going to be the most compelling answer to someone else. Does that make sense? So when someone asks me a question about, what we had donuts this morning from Sidecar. Is that a good place to eat donuts? Yeah. Hipster donuts. Awesome. But if Nick was trying to convince me to go there to get donuts, he's going to use what he loves about it to try to convince me. Does that make sense? And that's what happens with community. And I want us to just take a moment to think about that. Is that we think the most compelling answer to the question of why should I get involved in your community group, we think that we can come up with a more compelling answer than the gospel. And when you take a minute to let that sink in, and we can argue and we can debate on how true that is, but the natural response is often the most true response, right? If I'm unable to get here, then maybe I need to get my heart here so that we can so that there's an outflow of my heart when someone says, why should I join your community group? Or why would I want to be a part of this church? That the natural outflow is gospel, not food and fun. Yeah.
Just to understand it, feel like in that why focusing on the have to.
Yeah.
You're like emphasizing on the because you get to.
Yep.
Be proclaiming the truth of God. You get to be ascribing to God glory. I don't know if it's a given, but do you think in that same line of have to and get to, do you think it's good to even unpack because you have a need of, or to even unpack those realities a little bit?
I think you can always address where someone's coming from, like that they have needs. They might tell you what they're looking for, and I think you can always address the issue of like, this is how this might address that need. But let me tell you why. Why would it even address that need? Why would we do this community? There's the pushback I generally get, and is that the reason that we don't do this I mean, besides from the argument that maybe that's not our primary motivation, or maybe we don't believe it, is this idea of like, well, that's a really intimidating thing to say to a new person, right? Someone new comes in, brand new to the church, and they say, why do we get in a community group? And you're weighing between, my wife makes amazing nachos, and let me tell you about you're being dead in sin, and you're needing Jesus Christ to redeem you, right? And so it's a lot easier to just kind of go with the nachos, right? That's work, right? And what are we most afraid of? Rejection, going to scare them off, right? Let me put this idea in your mind, and this may come from my personal beliefs. I'm a believer in the sovereignty of God, and so when someone comes into my church and ends up talking to me about community, whether I'm a pastor or a community group leader or not, assumptions that I'm going to make is that they have a very deep why question in their heart, and that they most likely looked for answers to that why question in a lot of different places. They might have looked at it in a gym. They might have looked for it in a pub. They might have looked for it in a book club. They might have looked for it in a sports team. They've been trying to answer that why. And the world loves to try to answer that for them, right? They're bombarded with lots of what answers, but they're trying to answer whys, right? Right? If you drink this specific cola, then everybody's going to love you, right? If you wear these jeans, you're going to be the most popular person. I don't know. I'm going to say at your work, but I don't know. Those commercials usually aren't aimed for my demographic. But the world's trying to answer that question. So when they come to me, why would I answer in the same way? I've got an answer that they cannot get anywhere else. And if they didn't want to hear about Jesus, they probably wouldn't be here. And so the fear that we have, it's an irrational fear. It's like, well, I'm going to be rejected for telling someone about Jesus in a church. Well, I get, like, if you're down the road at the pub and someone's like, would you like an IPA or would you like a nut brown? And you're like, well, let me tell you about Jesus and why. Like, if I went into that conversation, that would be maybe weird. And I'd probably be rejected for that answer, but not when someone's asking about community within the church. Does that make sense?
In what cases that might it be legitimate to invite him in for the what and the for, that's the obvious, tell me and talk about the why later, as opposed to starting with why hopefully.
Yeah, so Dave asked the question, is it ever legitimate to kind of go in here and answer these questions or invite people in? We're going to get into some practicals in the afternoon talking about spaces, about being able to engage with people. And do I think that there's a time to invite people into community just for these things? I do believe that. But when we talk about our ultimate motivation for us as leaders, I think we have to understand this question. So when when I put myself in that position of someone within the church coming to me asking a very deep why question, I want to be able to answer, and I want to be able to just solidify in my own heart that this is why I do it. That doesn't mean that there aren't going to be, like when we're going to actually be talking about engaging neighbors and stuff like that, if I invite someone doesn't ask me the why question, but I'm trying to connect with them and engage with them relationally, yeah, it's fine to invite them and talk to them about food and fun because they're not asking that question. But when we ask the question of why, this has to be our motivation. And ultimately, all the things that we're going to talk about, that's why this is so important, is because what we're calling, what I am calling people to in community, what I believe Cross of Christ, and you're here from your church because your church, I'm assuming, believes in the same thing, is that the expression of community that we're talking about is an integrated, holistic view of community. That it is not just about doing a Bible study or just about being a missional community, but it's about developing disciples that are holistic and integrated people. So in order to do that, that's a tall order. And if we're not motivated by what Jesus has done, then we will never accomplish what we want to accomplish. One question, then we'll take a break. Okay, we'll take a break.